we're going to continue our talk on agriculture and raising alpacas. And last week we discussed a lot of the husbandry, feeder, shelter, water. We touched on shearing. And one thing I talked about was our solar water tanks, and I didn't have pictures. And I found some. So this is a picture from Mother Earth News, the article I had referred to, of the solar water tank. Whoops, come back. We made ours just a little taller, and they're not quite as wide, but it's basically the same plan. And it's a very simple construction. It's just insulated walls with a tank inside, and then the plastic corrugated sheeting on the side that's going to collect the solar heat. And this shows what the top looks like with just a small opening for them to drink out of. And we actually have made lids that fit in that hole, so on really cold nights we could cover it for the night. And that helped a lot with keeping it from freezing real hard. When I take the lid off in the morning, I'd maybe just have, a 1/4 inch of ice or something to break through, not 4 inches like some of my other tanks had. So I just wanted to show you guys what those solar tanks look like. And if you have, let's see if that'll escape out, as long as we're sharing. Here is the Mother Earth News article. So if you just Google Mother Earth News solar water tanks or solar stock tanks, you'll get the whole article with, I was right on the slideshow. Let's back up another one. All right, come on. All right, so you'll get the whole article with the directions on how to build it, and they do work really, really well for being such a simple construction. And they're pretty inexpensive to make, so definitely check that out if you have an interest in a solar water tank. So tonight, since I'm so well prepared, because I had short notice to do this, we're going to talk a little bit about herd health and the things we do with our alpacas here. I'm a big believer in less is more. I do not like to over-medicate, over-treat my animals. When we first got into alpacas, we were told to worm them twice a year, whether they needed it or not. We vaccinated every year. Anytime anything looked wrong, you'd run and grab some drugs and treat them. The big problem with treating them for parasites twice a year, whether they need it or not, is that the parasites have become resistant to the drugs, which means our dewormers are not as effective anymore at treating the parasites. I've had some animals that have very highly resistant worms in them, and I really struggled to find a treatment for them that would work. I've lost animals to parasites because I could not find anything that would work for them. I tend to take an approach of watching their body weights. Are they in good condition? Are they active? Does everything look good? And then just treat the ones that clinically look like they need treatment. And I've had much better luck doing that. Animals that come in with resistant worms, I do my best to treat them, and then I try to go as long as I can without treating those animals so that their parasites can mate with the parasites I have on site. I mean, this sounds kind of odd, but it helps reduce the resistance of the parasites. And it does work. I've had some girls that have been here now almost 2 years that were my real problem case, very resistant to any kind of drug I could find. And they now have they maintain a much lower parasite level, and they are responding well to it. So I can tell that we are lowering the resistance of the parasites they have. So I think what we'll do, I actually have a presentation on parasites that I've given before to some of the local organizations. And I think since we're not ready for anything, we'll go ahead and talk about this, not in as much detail as I do with other alpaca breeders, but I do my own testing mainly because I have over 200 animals, and it would be very cost prohibitive to be sending off fecal samples all the time to be tested. And we might have Wayne coming on. So anyway, staying on top of your parasites saves you time and money because you're catching problems before they become really serious. So you can manage your herd's health much earlier. Yep, here we go. And is that you, Mr. Doorband?
Yes, it is.
And would you like to take over, or do you want me to continue?
No, you continue. You're doing probably great.
All right. Okay, then we will continue on with fecal testing and parasites. All right, so again, we're testing to save time, money, and to keep on top of our herd health. All right, some of those clinical signs I look for when I'm going to check my animals to decide if I need to deworm them. Weight loss, that's the body score. Diarrhea, loss of appetite, anything where they just don't look normal. I actually spend a lot of time just walking through my herd and observing behavior. I can catch a lot of problems just noticing somebody doesn't look right, somebody isn't acting quite right, somebody's laying down a little goofy. And pale membranes. A lot of these parasites suck blood. They cause the animals to be anemic. And so I look for pale membranes. That's a big indicator that there's a problem. And there are times I'll just do a random test. There may be animals that have had past parasite issues, and I will collect samples from them just to make sure they're doing okay, because sometimes they might look fine and we have an issue developing. So by doing a random test, I can sometimes catch things a little quickly. When I say we're checking for pale membranes, we're checking the membranes around the eye. This animal is really anemic. This should be a pink color. And so when we see it get light in color, we know that we have a problem. And there's actually a chart. This is a little difficult to use for alpacas because this chart is based on goats. And the alpacas tend to not be this dark. They start more in this range. So these are kind of more of a normal range for an alpaca. But if they're getting into this range, I know I have a problem and I can't wait. This is not good. If they're white, that's pretty serious. When I talk about checking body scores, we're looking at, this is their backbone. And we want them to have just a nice round feel, not, well, tent-like, not terribly round because that means they're pretty fat. And we don't want to feel their backbone too much either. If they look like skin and bones, again, very a very serious situation that needs attention right away. So the kind of equipment I have for fecal testing is a microscope, slides, cover, slips, and then a tea strainer, just a simple little strainer. It says test tube, but they're actually just plastic tubes. And craft sticks. I buy cheap craft sticks. Collecting samples. I prefer to collect my samples from the animal. I'm not hearing you, Wayne.
I'm just going to throw something in. She talked about the craft sticks and just, you're hearing us now? You hear me now?
Yes, I hear you now.
Okay.
You had your mic muted, didn't you?
I did. She talked about craft sticks and just a theme here. You don't have to believe everything you read in books, for example, and this relates to all kinds of animal care about buy this, have this. A tongue depressor is probably 10 times more expensive than a craft stick, and yet they're essentially the same thing. And you don't have to do what I talked before about aquaculture and using Dixie cups rather than cups that you buy in hydroponic stores that would cost, and here's the difference there, 26 cents each to a Dixie cup that's a penny. So anyway, just bring that up.
And I do use Dixie cups also when I need to have something to stir in. So the difference between collecting from just out of your poo piles on the ground versus directly out of the animal is off the ground. You don't know which animal in the group you're testing, whereas if you're collecting straight from your animal, you know exactly what animal you got that sample from. It does require a couple people to do it. I have on occasion been able to do it alone. If I can collect a fecal sample by myself, my animal is not feeling very well. So that right there tells me we've got some issues. We won't go into details on how to collect the sample. It's very simple to do the test. You're basically just stirring up your little bit of your fecal sample in a sugar solution that will cause the eggs to float. The parasites pass eggs, and it just causes the eggs to float. And so this is where the test tube comes into place. You're putting it all in a test tube with the cover slip, which is just a little piece of glass that you use with the microscope. And you're letting those eggs float up, and they stick to the cover slip. So after several hours of floating, I let them float about 7 or 8 hours. You'll be able to look at that under the microscope and see what parasite you have. And it's important to know what parasite you're treating for, because different parasites need different drugs. So if you just start treating with a drug, you may be using the wrong one for the parasite your animal has, and it will do nothing. This is kind of technical stuff. I don't know how many of you really want to know the technical things for doing this. I'm going to skip ahead. So this is a picture of a basic stomach worm, an egg. So what we're looking at is not the worms, we're looking for the eggs. We're looking for evidence of the worms in the animal. So you can see it, the larvae already starting to develop inside the egg there. This is another one. This one is roundworm. Nematodiris is your roundworm. And this one is whipworm. This is a major one. This is another stomach worm. This one is commonly called barber pole. And barber pole is pretty serious with alpacas. They suck a lot of blood. They can cause them to go anemic very, very quickly. And this is one of the parasites that also is very easy to develop resistance to the drugs. They're called barber pole because the adult worms inside the animal are actually red and white striped, just like barber poles, old-fashioned barber poles. You know, I guess they're called barber poles in front of barber shops. And so that's where they get the name. It is one of the more serious issues we have with our animals. This is a coccidia, and this is where we need to know what we're looking at, because coccidia uses a totally different drug than your stomach worms do. And this one we call EMAC because that's easier to say than the whole name. And this one is our second most serious parasite we deal with. EMAC can cause major diarrhea, ill thrift, cria, which are babies. If they get EMAC when they're young, it's probably going to stunt their growth or at least slow them down. It can be pretty deadly if not caught fast enough. This is one where we're very fortunate where we live because our dry climate and our high altitude and all our sunshine helps keep EMAC under control. People on the East Coast, where it's very humid and very wet, have a much more difficult time with EMAC and keeping it in check. Oops, wrong way. This is our whipworm again, Trichuris, and I used to think it didn't really affect animals that much, but I'm seeing this a little more often in my thin animals, so I don't know if it's causing those animals to be thin or if their being thin is allowing it to flourish. So I'm paying a little more attention to this particular worm now. And Ray has a question. Where do they come from? They're just kind of naturally in the soil, and most of these are getting picked up from the soil. I have bought animals from the East Coast, and they have come with the parasites in them.
Most of the time, they're transmitted from other animals that come onto your farm. They'll also come from other ruminants that are native. Deer will carry, and so if you've got deer or elk, they could come. It's a little less likely. The spores, the eggs from these things will live in the soil for a long period of time, and they'll live in dung. They'll live in the poop, and they'll live in moist areas. So it's really something that just gets carried on over time.
Well, and part of the life cycle here, so a lot of these came with the animals I purchased. So when they would poop, the eggs are eliminated from the animal, and then those eggs hatch into larvae, and they spread out in the grass around the poo pile. And so if the animals start grazing in that area, then they ingest the larvae, and the cycle starts again. So they're ingesting that parasite, and so now they have either more of that parasite or introduced to them, and they'll flourish in the gut and pass the eggs and just kind of keep that cycle going. Because we personally are at a high altitude, our sunshine and our dry climate can kill a lot of those eggs in those piles, and in the larvae don't establish as well here as they do in more humid, wet climates.
One of the reasons that
if we go back,
we keep chickens is because those chickens will actually eat some of the waste, and that will keep our parasite loads down also. And I think that would be even more important for more moist areas. So Ray, for example, where you're at in Missouri, highly recommend with any kind of ruminant herd, cattle, sheep, goats, alpacas, that some kind of chicken or fowl that would be living right with your animals would be an amazing source of parasite control, as well as flying insects. So your flies will be less, your deer flies will be less, your horse flies will be less. A great synergy between those breeds.
So the another reason EMAC can be very difficult is it probably lives the longest in soil, and it can withstand the lowest temperatures and the highest temperatures. The eggs can. So it can hang around in your ground a lot longer than some of the others.
By the way, if you ever hear anybody pronounce the whole name, if anybody ever pronounces the whole name, you're going to hear it first. I've never heard even that pronounce Emiria macusiensis. So EMAC is certainly the abbreviation, but literally even the very best vets call it EMAC.
Yeah, so they call that EMAC. We call this one barber pole. Let's keep going. And this is another one I've been seeing more of lately. And again, it's kind of showing up in my thin animals. So I don't know if it's causing my vet doesn't think it should be causing the issue it is. So I think it's another one's kind of taking advantage of some of my animals that are thinner. And this one is tapeworm. And I've only seen tapeworm twice in my animals. And both times were in younger animals that came in from the East Coast. And my experience with tapeworm so far has been it's pretty easy to treat and deal with. And this one I've never seen. This is liver fluke. And this one can be pretty nasty for an alpaca. They can get it, but it is very rare that they do. And these parasites are common. The parasites alpacas get are very similar to the ones the goats get. So you'll hear people talk about not keeping their goats with their alpacas, and that is because the parasites are pretty much the same parasites, and goats carry a higher load than alpacas do. And as I said last week, I do keep my goats with my alpacas, but I also maintain a closed goat herd. And right now I only have 2 goats. But because my goat herd is closed and I got their parasites under control, I did not worry about what their parasite load would do to my alpacas. And then there's things you will see under the microscope that aren't parasites. This one is just a spore, but it can be mistaken for an egg. And this I see a lot of where we live. This is pine pollen. And I'm almost surprised if I don't see it in a fecal sample. And I found it very interesting. We just got some new girls from Virginia, and the first round of fecals I did on them were pretty clean. I didn't really see pine pollen. I retested them 2 weeks later, and they were loaded with pine pollen. So obviously they're inhaling pine spores in our trees. And this is for testing. So the goal...
Let's stop. Go back. See if somebody will get some of those.
Okay. Okay. Let's see if you can. Okay.
Let's do that one.
All right. Does anybody know what the eyeball is? Because that's what it looks like. Does anybody remember which parasite this one is? We went through them pretty quick. This one is, this one is our nematodyrus, which is roundworm. And down here, the little guy down here is whipworm.
By the way, I'm going to say this because she won't. This isn't nearly as easy as she's making it sound. And honestly, most alpaca breeders do not do this themselves. They pay vets to do this for them. They'll take their animals to veterinary colleges to do it for them. Remember, this is a whole series about the earth-friendly alpaca, the ecologically beneficial animal. We wanted to teach you a lot of this stuff about husbandry and health early on, because I'm going to come in starting next week I was going to even start today, but I'm glad Deb's able to do this today. And I'm sure she explained to you that I was in traffic, and which is crazy. It took an hour and 45 minutes to drive what should have been a 45-minute drive, and there wasn't any accidents. So I'm so glad that I live in the country and I don't have to drive to Denver every day, which is where I was. But I'm going to talk about how the fact that if you grow these animals in the way that we're going to recommend you can do to be earth friendly, the reality is you're probably never going to test for parasites. You're going to look for body scores and such, and you're going to do some things in your management. But it's really good to know this. But please don't think this is simple, and don't worry if it's something you're not understanding. How can I ever identify these? And Deb's got guides, right? Deb, when you're looking at things, you've got books that you can look at and guides that you can see.
Yeah.
That you can use.
Yeah, I have a chart I keep above the microscope to refer to, and I have a veterinary parasite manual, which is probably a little over most people's head. So does anybody want to take a guess at this one?
I don't even know.
This is our friend EMAC, right? What's that? You didn't know it either? And the biggest thing, when you have your chart, just know that it looks exactly like it does on the chart. If you kind of think it kind of looks like it, maybe doesn't, it's probably not it. EMAC looks like a watermelon seed, and it's fairly large compared to everything else you're going to be seeing. This one's a lower resolution, so we have an EMAC here, an EMAC there. We've got our whipworms over here, and we got our roundworm there. And this is not a parasite. This is just our spore. And so the only parasite we have here is that whipworm right there. The bigger thing is being able to ignore, like, these are just air bubbles. Nothing to pay attention to. These are nothing that we need to worry about.
Those are pieces of food that they didn't digest.
Yeah, this is just plant material. So my goal is to not create parasite-free animals. It's normal for them to have parasites. My goal is just to keep the levels below a certain amount. I want my animals to look and appear and act healthy. And if they do that with a little higher parasite load, I let them go. I don't, like I said at the beginning, I believe less is more. So I try not to treat anybody who looks and acts fine. And I'm not a vet, so I'm not going to give you doses. I'm giving you an overall. I really want people to work with their vets to develop their actual on-farm protocols for their herd health. Because depending on where you live, what you accept as your limit may be lower than what I would accept just because of your environment. Your limits, your thresholds may need to be different just because of your ecology, your environment. And so this lists some of the common drugs. There are also homeopathic drugs, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're safer for the animal. I have tried using wormwood for the goats for parasites, and that actually can be as lethal if you screw up your dosages as some of these drugs are. You know, hemlock's a natural product, but it's not necessarily safe for us. So bear in mind that natural products still can be you still may need to watch your dosages and how much you use. I also really struggled to get the goats to take the wormwood. It never really worked well for me. But what you can see is you're seeing different product names here, and this is why if I have a parasite issue, I need to know which parasite it is, so I select the right one. And the best thing to do is just trying to prevent parasite overloads, keeping your paddocks and your barn clean, cleaning your pastures. In my case, we can spread the manure out in the sun and let the sun desiccate it, let the chickens go through it and eat the larvae. Not everybody is in a place where the sun's going to do that. Some parts of the country, they actually burn their piles to kill the larvae. There's even people around here that do it, but I find I can just spread it out and it composts, it desiccates pretty quickly. Keeping your feeders in your water tanks clean, and rotating pastures. Pasture rotation is a wonderful thing. Having, chickens follow your animals through your pasture and clean up after them, rotating the kinds of animals you have going through those pastures. That is probably, yeah. And here we get into all the specifics. So, and did you want to expand on pasture rotation and some of the things we do with that?
Sure. And again, many of you are aware of the kinds of grazing practices that are taught by people like Joel Salatin, and he's probably the biggest name that you'll hear. And we practice what we call mob grazing, and we will put a fairly large number of animals in a fairly small area for a very short period of time. So a lot of animals in a small space for a short period of time. And that period of time might be a day or 2 days, maybe at the peak of our growth season for grass, which is in June, maybe into July. We might leave those pastures longer, and that's totally visual. We will take animals out of an area, move that pasture when we see that the grass is being eaten down, not throughout the entire pasture, but in certain various locations, down to where it's maybe an inch from the ground or so, because I don't care what kind of grass that you have in a pasture. It could be the most beautiful green bluegrass combination, you name it, all the different types, alpacas or goats or sheep, any kind of ruminant, even horses, will selectively graze. There will be some grass, some forbs they like better than others, and they're gonna pack themselves into a certain area and they're gonna graze that. That's why when you pack them in yourself into an area, they don't have the chance to do that. They're gonna graze an area much more consistently throughout, and then you move them. I'm going to use, or Deb can use the cursor on the screen. I'll show this in more detail in future weeks, but the real key becomes then how you manage them and move them and not have to spend all your time moving pastures, moving animals. And the easiest way to do it is having to come in through a single chute that you never move, which is what we do, and then you move your pastures and make them long and rectangular or sort of oval, and then you can take the fence and just move it to the next area to where it's going like this. And it's almost like the peacock on the NBC logo, where all of the feathers are going back to the central location, and then you can rotate the animals in between those pastures. When you're done, you go back and start over again and go through the series of pastures again. Again. That's the way we've done things until real recently, because now we actually have been able to take our pastures and do a large external fence for them, and we actually can create some different aisleways and allow them to get into different areas. And actually next year is going to be a real test for us, because we finished our large enclosure this year so late in the season that we'd already gone past the optimum positioning for our grass, so we weren't able to rotate as much as possible. But as Deb said, particularly for people in more moist climates, parasite control is important. Parasites are the most common cause of health problems in ruminants. And alpacas, being just like sheep and goats and cattle, would be that way. And so they're the most common thing you're going to need to deal with. They will cause slower growth. They'll cause mortality. They'll cause worse breeding circumstances, all kinds of things. So we'll go into more details on this, but that's really what we do for rotation. And Deb said another thing. Alpaca breeders, you'll see, do a lot more than other kinds of ruminant breeders in cleaning paddocks. If your animals are staying in an area at night, which is smaller in size than a pasture, they're going to foul that area, dirty that area more. You have to clean it. I mean, what would you say, Deb, for an 8-hour workday for a person that's managing our herd? How much of that 8 hours is spent cleaning poop?
I would say probably 2 hours in feeding and water and 6 hours in cleaning.
That's what I would have said. 2/3 or 3/4 really of their time is spent cleaning. So it isn't just cleaning poop, it's cleaning water, it's cleaning feed, it's cleaning a number of things, but that poop cleaning is really an important aspect. Now, I'm going to get real controversial next week because what I'm going to talk about for the way that we're going to recommend that you could be in a real earth-friendly sort of way, which is much like we used to farm large herds of livestock on the west coast of this country or throughout the Midwest and the East and the West, which was large pasture grazing, still using a mob strategy, but having them over a lot bigger piece. You're not going to be as concerned about that kind of specific care. But if you're growing just a small number of animals, if you've got 4 animals, for example, you're going to be, everything Deb's talking about is going to be a concern. Alpacas are very prone to predation. And the reason for it is they've only really been domesticated here in our country for a little less than 40 years now. That's a very short time for an animal that's been around for tens of thousands, maybe millions of years. In the wild, where they were imported into the U.S. from, in Peru and Bolivia and Chile, they grow pretty much the way that we used to herd cattle and harvest buffalo in the western United States. They're in large, multi-thousand acre pastures, and they're only brought in for a very short period of time in the spring to shear their fleece, to breed them, and to take care of their health at that time. And it's also when birthing occurs. And I don't remember whether you talked a lot about life cycle of them last week, Deb, but and we'll talk in more detail about that. But the fact is, the way that you're mostly going to grow them, if you've got small herds, 2 to maybe 50 animals even, is you're going to move them in and out from pastures into inside quarters because of the predation fear. And the reason, again, back to what I was saying, they've only been domesticated a short time. They have no natural predators in any of the places where they're native. There's no predators in Bolivia. There's no natural predators in Chile and none in Peru. They come to this country and they've only been here a short period of time. Our alpacas, they'll alert to a dog, but a bunch of them will go up and look right in their face. They're kind of a little wary, but they really aren't that concerned. And so they can be very open to predation. So most breeders make sure that at night, which is when you have the most fear of some kind of predation, all the kind of animals that would be problems for them, coyotes, dogs, wild dogs, which are, by the way, not wild, just dogs in the neighborhood, feral, but yet still owned by somebody who just isn't taking care of them, and they're just moving them all over. By the way, are you going backwards at that to get us dizzy?
Yes. Don't watch it. That slide. Loose dogs are probably the #1 problem for alpacas.
Yes. Because they really, again, they're so curious. So most of us put our animals inside at night, And that's where this poop cleanup that we're talking about is. If you're in a dry area like us, we don't clean our pastures. They'll create poop piles, and alpacas do tend to poop in certain areas, unlike goats that'll just poop wherever they're at, literally just wherever they're at, the poop just comes out of their butt. Same for sheep. Sheep will just go anywhere. Cattle will just go anywhere. Horses will just go anywhere. They have no hygiene that way. Alpacas are a little more fastidious, and they will poop in given locations, not just in one little pile. That's kind of a myth, but they will poop in general areas, and there's other areas they won't poop in at all. In a pasture, all you really need to do is sort of at the end of the season, not every time you move from one pasture to the next in a rotational grazing, but kind of at the end of the season, you just go through with a rake, either a mechanical rake or just hand rake, and just spread it out a little bit more. And we're actually, we put a large amount, I'm going to give a whole lesson on the value of alpaca manure as a fertilizer at one point. I'm going to show a bunch of pictures of how it's used and what value it can give, some of them from our farm. You actually want to spread it. It's not a health issue at that point. It actually can be a great fertilizer for you for your pastures. So did you have anything else specifically on the health? You went back to this slide. It looked like you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so I was going to continue on. While I have 3 scales on site, I seldom weigh my adult animals. I tend to use this body score chart more. It's faster, it's easier. As I'm walking through the herd, I can just quick, well, sometimes quick, sometimes just visualizing them, sometimes doing just a quick check down their back. Alpacas don't really like to be touched, so it's not always easy to get a real hands-on feel. And be aware their fiber can hide a lot. They can be a lot thinner than they look when they're in full fleece. But I will use the body score as a judge of, are they maintaining weight, are they losing weight? So you don't have to have a lot of expensive equipment with an alpaca herd. Like I said, I have 3 scales.
Yeah, unless you've got pictures here. Next week, we'll show some pictures of animals on our farm that just range from, and they're not in full fleece right now. They've been shorn fairly recently. And right. So you can actually see the difference between
the pictures of the wide range.
The right way.
Yeah. Examples of, yeah. Because I've got examples of all these sizes. I've got a 17-year-old female, which is on the older end of their age, who's nursing a 2-month-old baby, and she is pretty thin. So I'm working up a different feeding plan for her. She's got to get some weight back on her, and it's going to be a little difficult at her age to do that. But just keeping, your eyes are going to be the biggest tool that you're going to use with your animals. Watching their behavior, watching their weight. I do not vaccinate yearly anymore. There's been a lot of debate whether that's good or bad, but I started watching how they no longer recommended vaccinating the dogs annually. It's every 3 years now. So I've gone to vaccinating the animals every other year, and I may go to every 3rd year. Some people do not vaccinate their alpacas at all anymore.
Well, and we're going to talk about this a little more later too. To be able to be an earth-friendly animal in livestock, which they are, you are going to have to think about if you want to use them for meat. And that's your choice, and I have total respect for anybody who just does not want to even think about alpacas for meat. That's totally your prerogative. If you're going to, however, at least we believe that you shouldn't be using any kind of vaccinations within a certain period of when you're going to harvest them, or any kind of these medications, the parasitic or otherwise. We won't harvest an animal with any kind of antibiotics at all within a year of when we harvest them. Now, the cattle industry can actually, you can call animals antibiotic free if they've not had any antibiotics for, I think, 3 months prior to when you harvest them. I'm not convinced that that's a long enough period of time. So we're very careful. and we only harvest animals that we have not either fed pellets to, so they've either eaten just hay, and that we've given any kinds of outside medications to, so antibiotics or parasitic preventatives, or really anything. So that's something to keep in mind.
Right. So I try again. I'm spreading out my vaccinations mainly because a lot of what's in those vaccines, alpacas don't even get. So there's really a lot of people reported having reactions to the vaccine, and so is it really worth risking the reaction for something they're not going to get anyway? They can get tetanus, and the vaccines, and it's interesting, the CD&T vaccine is actually a cheaper way to vaccinate your alpacas for tetanus than a tetanus
You better say what
vaccine is.
CD&T means. What's that acronym?
Let's see if I can remember. Clostridium, Clostridium C and D, and alpacas only react to Clostridium A, which is not in any of these normal vaccines, and then the T is tetanus.
T is tetanus. And I actually think she's being overly descriptive now. I think we have animals she has not vaccinated within the 2 years that she just talked about. So we're being a lot less.
Now, there are some that have gone. Yeah. I've been cycling through like.
If Deb didn't say it, and I don't think I said it in week 1, we've done some. There's no statistics of this, but our herd, which is right now a little under 220, right? Like we're 210, 212, something like that right now. Is
maybe 215.
Okay, we're third or fourth largest in our whole region, so that's a big herd for alpacas. There's probably only 2 or 3 herds in the United States that are 1,000 animals or more, and most people, I think the average number of alpacas that the 3,500 breeders they believe there are around the United States now have 3 animals, 2, 3, 4 animals. So much smaller, but the fact is, because we have so many, I think we have better data points for a lot of what we're talking about here, because we're dealing with big numbers. We've had over our 10 years now in the industry hundreds of babies, and we'll talk about babies in one of these sessions. So we've seen a lot. We've seen just about every kind of birth issue you can imagine, and we'll talk about those. What else did you want to talk about for the?
Yes. So, well, now I just lost my train of thought. So I was just trying to think of what's kind of the common stuff you would be doing. Trimming nails. Most of our animals only get trimmed at shearing, and a lot of people think alpacas have hooves.
That's because we live on really hard. Our animals, during most of the time, are on very hard ground. If you're in a softer soil, we've heard this from a lot of breeders, they have to trim nails a lot more frequently than we do. Their nails are a lot like your fingernails. They're not hooves like a horse. So they're like, and actually they're much more like a dog. Yeah.
They have pads, and then the nail over the pad. So it doesn't take long to trim that nail, and it is 2 toes per foot, so you have 8 toes to trim per animal. Again, here's where they don't like to be handled comes into play. Trimming is usually a 2-person job, 1 to hold, 1 to trim. And that's why we like to do it at shearing. They're already restrained. And we are fortunate. I would say 70% of my animals never need to be trimmed in between. I'll have then probably 20% that might need a couple toes trimmed during the year. They don't need all feet done. And I have maybe 10 animals out of my herd, 10 to 15 that need a nail trim halfway through the year. And that still is pretty good. There's in moist areas, they might need to be trimming them every other month. Teeth trimming, it's best to breed for animals with a good bite so you don't have to trim teeth. We will trim some, let's see, out of 200 animals, at shearing time, we probably trim 40 sets of teeth, 40 animals, probably not even that many. And I have probably 4 animals that will get their teeth trimmed during the year again because they're just growing so poorly with a bad bite.
By the way, I'm looking at something here that in just a minute I'll show a little more about. This is the Alpaca magazine that we just happened to get today. And this is published by the National Alpaca Organization. And next week I'll probably show you a little bit more from here, but I'm going to show something here in just a minute. So.
The only virus we really worry about is it's BVDV, which is bovine viral diarrhea virus or something. It's bovine viral diarrhea. It is the only virus that really impacts alpacas. And so we actually test our youngsters for it sometime in the first few months to make sure they're negative. If an animal is positive for it, it can lead to abortion and a lot of health issues. So really, by keeping everything clean and maintained, I'm only worrying about parasites, EVD, and very little else. So taking care of these animals really isn't that difficult. We have a couple animals with skin issues right now. That's not, I mean, the alpacas can have mites. They're also pretty easy to deal with, at least here. And again, I think it's easy here because we are dry. Mites can be a bigger issue in herds in moist, humid areas. And are you getting that question?
Yeah, Ray, we actually do something in addition to this what is intended to be a short course on alpacas, and we're certainly not going to give every little detail because we live this. Alpacas are a big part of our lives, but we do something called the Alpaca Summit that we did for the first time in 2015. We get new members to it all the time. I think we've got 4,000 or 5,000 now, something all over the world. And we interview people for the summit that your friend up in Canada would be wonderful to interview. And I'd love to get that done for the summit. And frankly, we could do it here for our EAT program, but then we'd probably add it to the Alpaca Summit also. And anybody, and by the way, anybody that might have some value, and then ask her, and she also dyes all of her yarns. So does Deb, by the way. That's another whole complete course that she could teach. And we use natural dyes, and again, wonder if it'd be great to have other people that we'd be able to interview. So I'd love to know who she is. And somebody with 100 animals, we probably know her, quite honestly, because the Canadians come down to the U.S. for shows and different things. And one of our bigger breeders in the United States now was a Canadian breeder for most of their time in the business, and then they just moved down here to the States a couple of years ago, and they came out of the Alberta area in Canada. So yeah, we'd love to talk to somebody else. Deb, what else were you saying there?
Just that herd health is important. It doesn't require a lot of equipment. It doesn't require a lot of expense. It's
and we're
observation.
Observation is a big deal. Remember how much we've emphasized that. Mark has emphasized it in his classes. I've emphasized it as it relates to aquaculture, and we're emphasizing it here. You should hear the horror stories that we've heard from breeders that we know of that spend way too much money taking animals to Colorado State University for a broken toenail. Well, again, you can't do that if you're going to be raising livestock. And frankly, we tolerate a little bit more of a survival of the fittest action, in that there are animals that are clearly old, or they've got cancer, or something that is the only way they're going to be treated is that we spend thousands of dollars on them. We don't do it because they're not worth that. They don't have that kind of value, and they're not pets. We do not raise alpacas as pets. Now, does that mean that we don't have some that we treat as pets? We absolutely do. And frankly, those we would treat more from a medical perspective like a pet. But the vast majority of our herd are livestock, just like cattle would be, or sheep would be, or goats, and they're treated in that way. That's not typical. A lot of people treat their alpacas like they were their children. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you want to do, but realize you might as well forget about a sustainability or a profitability if that's the way that you're handling it. All that said, I don't think there's any written statistics about this, but I would argue that our survivability is higher than just about anybody else that I know of, and it doesn't matter how big their herd size is, unless they've just got 2 or 3 animals. We've had, in our 10 plus years of being in this, less than 5% mortality on an annual basis, and that includes our babies, and you're always going to lose more. And we've had 40, do we have 40 on the ground now, Deb? Is that what you calculated?
Unless there's another one over at the barn now. It's 39.
Okay. And we've lost 4 this year, right?
Yes. And I actually felt that was high.
I'm not talking about abortions and during, because in cattle, you never have any idea when you had an abortion. The cow's out in the field and they abort and there's a fetus there that's just tiny. And so Deb knows so carefully, because we are a breeding farm. We make our money, and that's what I was going to show because we're kind of proud of it. So this is our national issue of magazine, and this one happens to be here because we just got it today, because this is a full-page ad on page 6 of the magazine. This is the most famous alpaca in the world. He has produced more offspring that have incredible fleece than anybody in the world. He sold for more money 6 years ago than anybody in the world. That's not a huge value, but he just did. And we were fortunate enough to have recently bought him. And we have a partner with him, and that's actually where he's at right now. And we'll be going next weekend up, not this coming weekend, but the following weekend, to pick him up. He's in Iowa right now. What's that?
I'm dropping hints that I'm trying to drop hints to Julie that I'm anxious and want to come right now.
Oh, I see. So anyway, he's got what we call a dance card lined up, which would be girls that are ready to be bred to him. We'll talk about breeding in another time. But the reality is, even though we probably practice more on-farm healthcare, and Deb is really good at it, and then better than a lot of people would be, our mortality rates are way lower than almost anybody else that we know of. I mean, by a long way. When was the last adult that we lost, Deb? It would have been 2 or 3 months ago, correct? It was
I was more than that.
Yeah, it might have been 6 months ago.
Yeah, it's been a while. We'll lose a couple of adults a year because my herd, I have an older end to my herd. So I have my youngsters, but I have a group of animals that this year turned 17, 18 years old, which is, kind of at the upper end for alpacas. So
there are myths out there. When we first got in, they were trying to convince us that alpacas would live to be 30 years old. I have not ever heard of a 25-year-old alpaca. I've heard of some in the 20s. We have not yet had one reach 20, correct, Deb?
Correct.
So the higher teens is probably where their life cycle. What's that?
Yeah. I'm not sure we've had any go past 18 before.
Yeah, that's what I said, later teens.
I was going to say,
Somebody's asking, I'm wondering the cost of keeping that many animals, feed, vet costs, labor, and the payoff for the fleece and possible meat. We're going to go into great details about that. I will show you numbers that will be as transparent as you want and as will be totally. Bottom line, though, just to give you a little bit of sense here tonight, about the way that historically people treat or manage animals, which is the way I was describing. They're in pasture or larger areas during the day. They're brought back into a paddock area at night. They're fed hay at night, for example, even when they have grass that they can eat during the day. So there is a cost of some feed. The average cost per year per adult animal is going to be somewhere around $300. I'm going to show you a way that you can get that down to under $100. But it's not the traditional way that most people are raising alpacas. So, but most people would be in that 300 range. It could be somewhat higher. If you're taking every animal that ever gets sick to a veterinary hospital, a vet school somewhere, your costs are going to be a lot higher than 300 an animal. So they could be 500 an animal. But to answer the second part of your question, you're never going to make money with fleece. You can have the top best fleece. If all you're doing is trying to just shear it and sell it, you're going to get, what's the very most you'd get off of the very best animal you could get, Deb? I'm going to let her answer it. From just the raw fleece that you've paid $20 probably to have shorn. So not even counting the cost. I was putting that into the $300. But what are you going to get for it? 40 bucks?
Right.
$40, $50 at the most.
At the very most, I was going to say 70.
Maybe 70.
But that is, and
that's
really,
really,
you're hitting the right micron, the right blanket size, the right staple length, and the right color.
and that's what we're breeding for. And that's what we're breeding for. But you know, you're going to have a lot of animals that aren't going to fit that. So you're not going to make money on raw fleece. Now, let's say you're a spinner or a weaver, and you can take that and you can make that into garments. You can make it into hats. You can make it into scarves and sweaters and vests and suits and you name it. You can then make money on an individual animal basis. If you're a fiber artist and you can make it into something that's artistic, you can make a lot more. A single animal will make 20 pairs of socks, for example. It'll make a hat and two or three sweaters. It'll make a very good amount of clothing for people that you can either use yourself or you could sell. If you're able to do that, you can take that $40 value of raw fleece and triple or quadruple, maybe 5 times the value. So now you're up to 200 or 300, and then that single animal is going to be breaking even or making you some money. Or again, I'm going to say it, please don't think you can all do it, but this guy, that picture that I showed, for a single year, which was the first year that the people that we bought him from had him, they were making $9,000 a breeding. They did 100 breedings. You do that math. That'll pay a lot more than $300 a year. Now, they paid $675,000 for him, but that math is pretty easy. That's $900,000 that they got back in a year. I can't tell you, we're actually under confidentiality to be able to say what we paid for him, but we will pay him off from breedings that we do from him in less than 6 months. So that's where the money is right now, but it's not in fleece unless you take that fleece to a higher value. What would be a really nice piece of fiber art, Deb? What would be a price for something that you could make?
If you're in the right market, because not every part of the country will support a good, healthy fiber artist market, but Denver, Boulder, these areas, you could probably sell nicely done wall hangings or table runners or what, you know, so you can probably do a table runner for $100 and a wall hanging for several hundred.
And you could make 10 of those.
You're talented with
10 of those for one animal. So You could make a lot of money. So then we'll get to meat, and we're going to have a whole session on meat. But real simply, an alpaca will yield about 60 pounds for the carcass of meat, of totally deboned meat, of all the different cuts and the same kinds of cuts that you could get off of a beef or a cow. 60 pounds of meat, it is not at all crazy. We have no problem selling meat for $10 a pound, and it can be even sold for more than that. So let's just use the $10. That's $600. The processing cost for that animal, if you're having a slaughterhouse do everything, you're literally just taking it there and you're bringing home the meat and the hide and bones and other things. I'm just talking the meat. And we've done a lot of them, about $160, right, Deb? I want to just check. She's got all the specifics and numbers. But we'll show you this.
Yeah,
that's about
yeah,
right.
140
140
to 160. Because it
means,
varies depending on if you're having sausage done, because those will cost,
and that's
having
higher
sausage
value,
made will cost a little more.
That's higher value meat. So that $10 a pound becomes low at that point. Bottom line is that you should be able to net easily $400 to $500, if not $600, close to $600 per animal. Well, now you start to do the math on that, and let's say you have a herd of 10 animals, and they're all females. You don't need males, by the way. You can get other people to help give you, you can get a male that you can lease for a week or a month or whatever to breed your females. For all you're doing is trying to make money from them. You can make some money from the fleece. You can use it for your own value. And then as those animals have babies and you get males that you aren't going to do something else with, and let's say 2 years down the road, maybe 3, you harvest them for meat, they can be as profitable as any kind of animal that you would grow on your farm. But you're going to have to be in a mentality that you would harvest them for meat. Most alpaca breeders won't. 90% of alpaca breeders in the United States would not even think about harvesting their animals for meat. Just so you understand the difference there. Let me see, did I answer that question? And we're going to go into a lot more detail on that. I guess I'm wondering about the profit margin. Well, again, you do that math. If it's costing you $300 a year to raise one, I'll show you these numbers in a chart fashion, just like I did for aquaculture. Now, what you really have to do is look at your whole herd. So if you had 10, let's say you had 10 animals, so that means it cost you $3,000. And let's say that you sold just raw fleece from 2 of them for $40 each, so that's $80. The other 8 you turned into garments. So let's say you averaged $200 per animal for those, so that's $1,600. So now with the 80, you're up to $1,700. And let's say you decide to harvest 3 of those animals, and that's another $1,800. You just made profit. You just made $800 off of that $3,000 that you had for costs for those 10 animals. And you still had babies, so your herd actually increased in numbers. And your basis in those animals, in other words, what you paid for them today in this market, if you're paying more than $100, and you should pay something, don't take them for free from somebody. You're going to see people who give them away. They're probably almost always sick, or they've got something else wrong with them. It's just like we're in the dog breeding business, and we will always tell people, don't take an animal for free. There's almost always a reason somebody's giving something away, unless it's a friend of yours, somebody you really know well. But just generally, just because there's an ad in Craigslist or whatever, and there's lots of them. But pay $100 for an animal, and you're probably going to get a decent one at that number. Well, you start breeding, now you don't have any purchase cost in your new animals, and if you don't add that into the equation, yeah, you can be profitable. You can make $600-800 a year off of 10 animals. Over and above the fact that if you ate that meat yourself, it could be all your protein that you need for a year. So we'll talk about lots of other things related to that. What is I think you mean kind of dog. Does that mean kind, or what is the king of dogs? I'm not sure what the king of dogs is. But
what kind?
Deb,
there's a correction in the next.
Yeah, so if you mean what kind of dogs are problems, because we talked about that. I don't think we talked about guard dogs too much tonight. If you're talking about guard dogs, there are a variety of different breeds. We happen to have Great Pyrenees. We've had mixes of wow, my brain's going dead here. Anatolians are real commonly used. Akbash, yeah, we had our best dog that we lost to cancer as a guard dog, although he wandered a little bit. But that's what guard dogs will do. We could give a whole lecture on guard dogs if you guys would like at some point. They're amazing, neat animals to have. They serve a lot of purposes other than guarding. But those breeds, it would be in that range. I know of people that have herding dogs also, like border collies. They wouldn't be. I wouldn't trust a border collie in my area. I don't think a border collie could take on a bear. My Great Pyrenees could take on a bear. I worry about a bear, not about my dogs. I've seen my female Great Pyrenees kill a coyote that fast, and I'm not joking, that fast, by just cracking their neck, just taking it off that fast. So I wouldn't want to be most of the predators that we have. I think a wolf would be a problem, but I think a mountain lion would probably also. But I believe our Great Pyrenees would fight to the death with a mountain lion probably, and I wouldn't want to have that kind of injury occur. But so if that's what you're asking, if you're asking about what kinds of dogs are potential predators on them, it could be anything. Again, any dog large enough to take down an alpaca could be a problem. So, and we're just talking about neighborhood dogs that just happen to get out. That they're by far, we don't have problems with them. I would hate to be the neighborhood dog that got anywhere around our Great Pyrenees. They would kill that neighborhood dog real quickly. But other people that don't have that situation do have real problems with neighborhood dogs. Deb, how many stories? We've heard lots of stories about neighborhood dogs.
Well, we had a neighborhood dog. Remember years ago, the people on the ridge above us, their dogs kept wandering down here, and one of them stuck its head through the fence. Yeah. And Shiloh got a hold of it and got him off the dog. That was the last time that dog ever came down here.
Yeah, I remember that happening again. That poor dog, well, that lucky dog that it didn't get in there, because Shiloh would have killed him in a heartbeat. And these guard dogs, again, we could do a really neat segment. As mean as I'm making them sound, we've never had one that I wouldn't trust my infant granddaughter with. They can turn it on and off with what they know are their foes compared to a person in a heartbeat. We'll show some pictures. Our 140-pound Great Pyrenees sit on Deb's lap. They're lap dogs. And they're as cuddly and as loving and just amazing with people. People aren't threats to them, and so they're not guarding against people. It's other animals. Now, I wouldn't trust any of our other dogs. We have hunting dogs that we have, and I'm not going to put them anywhere around my Great Pyrenees because they're going to be a threat, even though they really aren't a threat. But the Great Pyrenees are going to think they're a threat. So we've gone over. You guys have all been really patient. Most of you are all still here. Any other questions before we sign off for the night, for the day, or sometimes some places in the world? All right, thank you for those that have said very interesting. Appreciate that, Ray. Thanks. Others? Anything else from anybody before we sign off? All right, so next week I'm going to go into those details about, like I said, I'm going to go into the details about how you can make some money with alpacas. Why should they be something you would think about? We're not preppers. I'm going to end with this. We're not people who think the world's going to end tomorrow. However, I have no worry that if there was something that happened that caused us to become isolated from food, from you name it. The only thing I would worry about is terrorism, and I hope I could even defend us from a little bit of that. But if there's anything else that would happen, because of our alpaca herd, because of our aquaculture, because of our chickens, because of what we do on our farm, I have no problem and worry that we could survive for years. I mean, I really wouldn't even put a number on it. We could survive for as long as we weren't threatened from a terrorist perspective, because we have clean water because of how we manage it. We have animals that we could harvest. We have wild animals too. We haven't even talked about. I don't know that we even have to kill an alpaca. We have deer that are, they don't come into the area right where our alpaca is, but I could easily kill enough deer for 4 or 5 families in an annual period. We have all kinds of plants that you could forage for and make all of your greens. You could store them during the winter. We have plenty of wood to create fuel for both warmth and also for biofuels for running vehicles if we needed to. So that's, even though, like I said, I really don't believe that we're at some place where I should worry about that tomorrow. But it is nice knowing that if something happened, there could probably be 50 families that lived in our farm area or even more, as long as we all got along together, and we could live completely out. We would need nothing else from the outside. No power. I mean, I'm talking about an EMP event where we lose all the power, we lose everything. We could do very well. If you've not read the book 1 Second After, highly recommend it. You guys would all enjoy it. Just because it's something that could happen, and you'd enjoy learning about, wow, what should we be thinking about in case something like that does happen. All right, well, I think we'll call it quits for now. Thank you for everybody, and we'll talk tomorrow about restoration agriculture with Mark Shepard. Thursday, we're going to be on our alternative health, and we're going to talk with Mike Warren about this amazing weekend experience that he had at the largest alternative care cancer conference that he was at. We're actually adding a new speaker next week. We're going to talk about soil microbiology, and we're going to have a whole series on soils and how you manage your soils. And we also just added somebody that we're going to talk about natural building materials, and we're going to actually very quickly be moving into different kinds of power sources, solar, wind, all different alternative sources, and then also alternative vehicles and what kinds of mainly power and drive trains and so on that you would use in different kinds of vehicles. All of these economic kinds of topics. So adios, everybody. Have a good night. Thank you.
Night.
I almost forgot to stop.